Your phone buzzes. Just a weather alert. You glance at it between sips of coffee. Another polar vortex warning, the third this month. You swipe it away. The furnace kicks on. Normal. Everything is normal. Except your furnace has been running for 6 hours straight, and it's April. You pull up the thermostat app. 61 degrees inside. You set it to 70. The little flame icon is solid, steady, burning through propane like it's January. But the trees outside have buds on them. The calendar says spring. And yet, when you exhale near the window, you can see your breath. Something is wrong with the math. Not your math, the planet's. See, most preppers spend their weekends getting ready for the loud disasters. The nuclear flash, the grid-down EMP, the convoy of marauders rolling down Main Street. They buy rifles, they stack ammo, they rehearse firefights in their heads while mowing the lawn. But here's the thing about the apocalypse. The one that actually gets you won't announce itself with an explosion. It won't give you an enemy to shoot. It arrives as a thermostat that doesn't make sense. A winter that overstays its welcome by 3 months. A spring that simply forgets to show up. The most dangerous sound in the universe isn't a bomb. It's silence. The silence of a planetary engine that just seized. You thought you were surviving because you're tough, because you're prepared, because you read the books and stacked the cans and dug the root cellar. Adorable. You're surviving because a river of warm water you've never seen, never touched, and never thought about has been running underneath the Atlantic Ocean for the last 11,000 years, keeping your little patch of dirt from turning into a frozen graveyard. The Gulf Stream, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, a name so boring it could put you to sleep, which is fitting, because when it stops, a lot of people are going to sleep forever. Welcome to the disaster no one's prepping for. The one that doesn't care about your bunker, your beans, or your bullets. The one where the planet changes the thermostat and locks you out of the settings. Let's talk about the machine. You live on a planet that spins through the void at 67,000 miles per hour, tilted at a drunk angle, heated unevenly by a nuclear fireball 93 million miles away. By all rights, this should be chaos. The equator should be an uninhabitable furnace. The poles should be colder than they already are. Half the planet should be roasting while the other half freezes solid. But it's not. And the reason it's not is because Earth has an HVAC system. Picture it like this. The Atlantic Ocean is a massive loop of moving water, a conveyor belt. Down in the tropics, near the equator, the sun beats down on the surface. The water heats up. It becomes less dense. It rises. And then it starts drifting north, carrying all that thermal energy with it like a slow-motion delivery truck hauling heat to Scandinavia, Iceland, Britain, and the eastern seaboard of North America. This is why London, which sits at the same latitude as Labrador, isn't buried under permafrost. This is why you can grow crops in Ireland and raise cattle in Scotland, instead of hunting seals and building igloos. The warm water drifts north. It releases its heat into the atmosphere. The air warms, the water cools. And here's where the magic happens. As the water cools, it also gets saltier. Evaporation pulls fresh water out, leaving the salt behind. Cold, salty water is dense, heavy. It sinks, plunging thousands of feet down into the deep Atlantic like an elevator to the abyss. And once it hits the bottom, it starts creeping back south, completing the loop. A cycle that's been running, uninterrupted, since before humans figured out fire. That's your conveyor belt. That's your heat pump. That's the invisible engine keeping the Northern Hemisphere from becoming a frozen hellscape. And right now, someone is pouring sugar into the gas tank. Here's the problem with engines. They have failure points. The AMOC doesn't run on gasoline. It runs on salt. Specifically, it runs on the density difference between warm, light water and cold, heavy, salty water. That density difference is the pressure that keeps the whole system moving. Take away the density difference, and the pump loses pressure. The conveyor slows. Eventually, it stops. And what takes away the density difference? Fresh water. You've heard about the ice caps melting. You've seen the footage of glaciers calving into the sea, great white cliffs crumbling into the North Atlantic like slow-motion avalanches. Maybe you thought it looked dramatic but distant. A problem for polar bears. A problem for future generations. Here's what that footage actually shows. A planetary-scale act of sabotage. Every ton of ice that slides off Greenland and splashes into the ocean is a ton of fresh water being injected directly into the mechanism that keeps your region habitable. Fresh water is light. It floats on top of the salt water. It dilutes the brine. And every year, more of it pours in. A growing layer of cold, fresh, buoyant water that refuses to sink. The pump is losing pressure. The conveyor is slowing. This isn't speculation. This isn't a computer model. This is measurement. The AMOC has weakened by approximately 15% since the mid-20th century. Some studies suggest it's the weakest it's been in over 1,000 years. The engine isn't running at full speed anymore. And here's the part that should make you put down the coffee and pay attention. The system has tipping points, thresholds. There's a speed below which the conveyor can't recover on its own. Once it crosses that line, it doesn't gradually slow down. It collapses. The current stops. And it doesn't come back for centuries, maybe longer.
Now I know what you're picturing. You saw The Day After Tomorrow. You're imagining a wall of ice racing through Manhattan, flash freezing everything in its path, while Jake Gyllenhaal outruns the cold in a library. That's not how this works. Hollywood needs drama. Physics doesn't care about drama. Physics works on its own schedule. An AMOC collapse isn't an instant freeze. It's a slow-motion strangulation, a gradual rewriting of the rules you've built your entire life around. It happens over years, maybe a decade or two, fast enough to destroy civilization, slow enough that you'll watch it happen in real time. The first thing you notice is the winters. They get longer, colder. The polar vortex, which used to be an occasional headline, becomes a seasonal resident. Snow that used to melt by March is still on the ground in May. You burn through your heating budget faster. You complain about it. You adapt. Then the summers start to shorten. The growing season shrinks. Farmers who used to plant in April can't get into their fields until June. Harvests get smaller. Food prices creep up. You grumble about it at the grocery store. You assume it's temporary. It's not temporary. Year after year, the pattern worsens. The temperature drops another degree, then another. The climate you knew as a child becomes a memory. The climate your parents knew becomes a myth. And 1 year, maybe 5 years from now, maybe 15, you wake up and realize that winter never ended. Not because it arrived suddenly, but because it arrived slowly, and you kept waiting for it to leave, and it simply didn't. Let's do some geography. Let's figure out who freezes first. If you live in the northern United States or Canada, congratulations, you're in the blast zone. The AMOC collapse hits you harder and faster than almost anywhere else on the planet. That warm water that used to drift up from the tropics, it's not coming anymore. And without it, your region reverts to what the latitude actually suggests it should be. Boston becomes Siberia. Chicago becomes Yakutsk. Minneapolis becomes a frozen archaeological site where future explorers will find your pickup truck buried under 50 feet of ice and wonder what kind of society built machines they couldn't use for 9 months of the year. The power grid, that humming, invisible web of infrastructure you've taken for granted your whole life, was not designed for this. Transformers start failing when the temperature drops past certain thresholds. Steel becomes brittle. Lubricants solidify. Ice loads pile onto power lines until they snap like guitar strings. And the repair crews? They can't work in -50 conditions. Nobody can. The equipment won't start. The human body can't function. The grid doesn't collapse all at once. It fails in patches. Regions go dark. They stay dark. And the patches spread. Now you're in a house that's 30 degrees colder than it should be. The furnace is silent because there's no electricity, and the propane ran out 2 weeks ago. And the nearest functioning hospital is 300 miles south through roads that haven't been plowed since October. That bunker you built? That homestead you defended? It's not a fortress anymore. It's a tomb with better insulation. But wait, you're clever. You saw this coming. You packed up the truck and headed south. Florida, Texas, the Gulf Coast. Somewhere warm. Somewhere that's about to become hell. See, the AMOC doesn't just cool the north. It regulates the whole system. All that heat that was being transported poleward, it doesn't disappear when the conveyor stops. It piles up. It accumulates. The tropics, which were already hot, become pressure cookers. The equatorial belt transforms into something out of a fever dream. You thought hurricane season was bad before? That was with a functioning climate. Without the heat distribution system, the ocean surface temperatures in the Gulf and the Caribbean spike. Warmer water means more evaporation.
More evaporation means more energy in the atmosphere. More energy means storms. Storms of a magnitude you've never seen. Category 5 becomes the baseline. Category 6 becomes a real conversation. Cyclones the size of Texas, with wind speeds that turn houses into shrapnel, become annual events. And they don't stay in the ocean. They make landfall, again and again. And even when it's not storming, the humidity becomes a killer. The human body cools itself through sweat, but sweat only works if the air can absorb moisture. When the wet bulb temperature exceeds 95 degrees Fahrenheit, evaporation stops. Your body can't cool itself. You overheat. You die. Not from starvation, not from violence, from standing outside. The equator doesn't become a refuge. It becomes a blast furnace with hurricanes.
Okay, so north is too cold. South is too hot. What about the middle? What about the heartland? The great American breadbasket where the corn grows tall and the preppers stack their beans in peace. Let's talk about agriculture. Everything you eat, every can in your pantry, every freeze-dried pouch in your bunker, every bag of rice in your storage came from a field, a farm, a patch of dirt where someone planted seeds and waited for the sun and rain to do their work. That system runs on predictable seasons, predictable temperatures, predictable rainfall. The Midwest Corn Belt exists because the climate there, for the past several thousand years, has been perfect for growing grain. Not too hot, not too cold, enough rain, long enough summers. The AMOC collapse rewrites those rules. The temperature differential between the tropics and the poles creates weather patterns, jet streams, monsoons, storm tracks. When that differential changes, when the north gets colder while the equator gets hotter, everything shifts. The rain that used to fall on Kansas starts falling somewhere else. Or it doesn't fall at all. Or it falls all at once in catastrophic floods followed by years of drought. The Corn Belt doesn't just shrink, it moves. Or it vanishes entirely. And here's the thing about modern agriculture. It's a knife-edge operation. Farmers don't plant extra just in case. They plant exactly what they need to meet demand and turn a profit. The global food supply has about 3 months of buffer. 3 months between harvest and famine. When the growing seasons fail, not in one country, but across the entire Northern Hemisphere, that buffer evaporates. Prices spike, governments start hoarding, export bans go into effect, and suddenly the canned goods in your bunker aren't just for you. Everyone wants them. Fine, you're adaptable. You always knew farming was fragile. That's why you learned to fish. That's why you moved near the coast. The ocean provides. The ocean is endless. The ocean has been feeding humans since before we invented fire. Except the ocean is about to die. You need to understand how ocean ecosystems work. It's not just fish swimming around waiting to be caught, it's a pyramid. At the bottom of the pyramid are the tiny things: phytoplankton, zooplankton, microscopic organisms floating in the sunlit upper layers of the water. They're the grass of the sea. Everything else eats them, or eats something that eats them. But plankton don't just drift around randomly. They bloom where the nutrients are. And the nutrients, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the trace minerals that phytoplankton need to grow, are concentrated at the bottom of the ocean. In the deep water, miles down in the cold, dark, nutrient-rich abyss. How do those nutrients get to the surface where the plankton can use them? The current, the conveyor belt. The sinking cold water that plunges down in the North Atlantic creates a suction effect that pulls deep water up elsewhere. A massive ocean elevator that's been running for millennia, cycling nutrients from the depths to the surface in a continuous loop. Stop the conveyor, stop the elevator. When the AMOC collapses, the ocean stratifies. Warm water on top, cold water on the bottom. No mixing, no nutrient transport. The surface becomes a beautiful blue desert, pretty to look at, devoid of life. The plankton die. The fish that eat the plankton die. The fish that eat those fish die. The seabirds die. The marine mammals die. The fishing industry collapses. The coastal communities that depended on it collapse. The global protein supply takes a hit it can't recover from. And it gets worse. Phytoplankton don't just feed the ocean, they feed you. They produce somewhere between 50 and 80% of the oxygen on this planet. More than all the rainforests combined. Every other breath you take came from a microscopic organism floating in water you'll never see. When the ocean dies, the oxygen math starts to change. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just a slow grinding decline in the atmospheric oxygen percentage, from 21% to 20 to 19, to levels where your body starts to struggle, where high altitude areas become unlivable, where every breath feels slightly wrong and you can't figure out why. You're not just losing food, You're tampering with the air. All right, enough nightmare fuel. Let's talk about you. You're a prepper. You've done the work. You've got the beans and the bullets and the backup generator. You've calculated your supplies down to the calorie. You know exactly how long you can last. And I'm about to explain why all your math is wrong. Your calculations were based on assumptions. Assumptions about winter length. Assumptions about temperature range. Assumptions about the climate you grew up in. The one that's about to stop existing. Let's do the real math. You've got 3 cords of firewood stacked in the backyard. Maybe 500 gallons of propane in the tank. A 2-year supply of freeze-dried food in the basement. Solar panels on the roof. A well with a hand pump. You look at those numbers and feel secure. You feel ready. Except all of those numbers were calculated for the old world. The world where winter lasted 3 months and the average January temperature was 25 degrees. The world where spring came in March and you could start growing food by May. That world is ending. In the new world, winter lasts 9 months, maybe longer. The average temperature drops 30 degrees. Your furnace, designed for the old cold, runs continuously and still can't keep up. Your firewood burns at double the rate. Your propane evaporates into the insatiable maw of a heating system fighting a war it can't win. That 5-year supply of heating fuel, it's now an 18-month supply, maybe less. Your freeze-dried food lasts longer, but what happens when it runs out? You were counting on your garden, your greenhouse, your ability to grow food in the spring. Except there is no spring, not anymore, and your garden is under 4 feet of snow in June. The math doesn't just change, it inverts. Everything you thought you had enough of, you don't. Everything you thought you could do without, you can't. And here's the part that hurts, your solar panels. That beautiful off-grid power system you spent $20,000 on. The one that was going to keep your lights on when the rest of the world went dark. It's useless. The AMOC collapse doesn't just bring cold, it brings clouds. The violent collision between the cooling north and the heating equator creates a permanent storm belt across the mid-latitudes. Perpetual overcast, snow squalls that last for weeks. A gray, grinding, sunless sky that blocks the radiation your panels need to function. Solar power works great in stable climates. In the new world, your panels become very expensive snow collectors. Let's talk about the lies preppers tell themselves. I'll be the gray man, I'll blend in, nobody will even know I'm prepped. That strategy works when resources are scarce, but not universally critical. You can be the gray man when some people are hungry and others aren't. You can fly under the radar when desperation is localized. But when everyone is freezing, when the entire neighborhood is shivering in dark houses, burning furniture to stay warm, and they see smoke coming from your chimney, when you're the only house on the block with lights in the windows, you're not the gray man, you're the target. There is no blending in when the resource everyone needs is heat, your insulation, your fuel, your warm clothing. These become the most valuable commodities on the planet, more valuable than gold, more valuable than guns. Because you can't eat gold and you can't keep warm with a rifle. The post-AMOC world doesn't care about your tactical fantasies. It doesn't care how many rounds you've stockpiled. The math is simple. Hypothermia kills you in hours. Starvation takes weeks. The guy with the thermal gear survives longer than the guy with the ammo cache. The only resource that matters is the ability to not freeze to death. So what do you actually do? This is where we stop panicking and start thinking. Because panic is useless, but preparation, real preparation, informed by the actual threat, can save your life. The first and most important rule, mobility is life. Your bunker is a death trap. Your homestead is a coffin with a nice view. When the climate shifts permanently, the single greatest asset you can have is the ability to leave. You need to understand that the collapse won't hit everywhere equally. There will be zones, Goldilocks zones, where the new climate is survivable. Places where the temperature remains livable, where food can still grow, where the human body can still function. Your job, starting now, is to identify those zones and have a credible plan to get there. Look at a map. Think about latitude. Think about altitude. Think about proximity to the equator and distance from the worst of the polar cooling. Southern Europe, parts of South America, portions of Africa, New Zealand. These regions will face their own challenges, but they won't face the binary choice between freezing and cooking that North America will. You need route plans, backup routes, fuel caches, staging areas, allies along the way. Because when the exodus begins, and it will begin, the roads will be clogged, the borders will be contested, and the people who move first will be the ones who survive. Second rule, if you can't grow it inside, you don't eat. Forget the field. Forget the backyard garden. Forget everything you learned about traditional agriculture. In the new world, growing food outdoors is a sucker's bet. The weather is too unpredictable. The seasons are too short. The sunlight is too weak. The future of food is indoor agriculture, hydroponics, aeroponics. Grow lights powered by geothermal or nuclear. The only energy sources that don't depend on sunshine. Insulated greenhouses with triple pane glass and backup heating. This isn't hobby farming. This is survival engineering. You're creating a closed-loop system that produces calories regardless of what's happening outside the walls. Leafy greens, root vegetables, high-calorie crops that can grow under artificial light. Start learning now. Start building now. Because when the collapse comes, the learning curve becomes vertical and unforgiving. Third rule, thermodynamics over ballistics. I know. This one hurts. You love your guns. You've spent years building your collection, training your skills, perfecting your tactical response. And I'm not saying guns are useless, they're not. Security still matters. Defense still matters. But your budget is wrong. For every dollar you spend on ammunition, you should be spending $5 on insulation, on R-value, on thermal mass, on passive heating systems that work without electricity, on extreme cold weather gear, not the stuff you buy at the sporting goods store, but the real equipment designed for polar expeditions. The gear that keeps Arctic researchers alive when it's 60 below. You can't shoot the cold. You can't intimidate it. You can't negotiate with it. Thermodynamics doesn't care about your tactical prowess. It's a physics problem, and the only solution is engineering. Rocket mass heaters, thermal banking, underground construction, heat exchangers, materials that store warmth during the brief hours of weak sunlight and release it slowly through the endless nights. This is your new curriculum. This is the knowledge that separates survivors from statistics. Let's talk about the cascade. Nothing in a complex system fails in isolation. The AMOC collapse isn't just a climate event. It's a trigger for a chain reaction that ripples through every system humans depend on. The food supply fails, prices spike, economies collapse, governments lose legitimacy, social order breaks down. Mass migrations begin, not the trickle of refugees you've seen on the news, but floods of desperate people moving south, moving anywhere, moving because the alternative is death. Borders become war zones, resources become flashpoints, alliances fracture. Nations that were stable for centuries tear themselves apart in a decade, and somewhere in the middle of this chaos, you're trying to survive. The prepper fantasy is that you'll ride out the storm in your well-stocked bunker and emerge into an empty world ready for rebuilding. That's not what happens. What happens is a grinding, years-long collapse where everything you depend on, supply chains, medical care, law enforcement, basic infrastructure, degrades incrementally until it's gone. You don't survive that by hiding. You survive it by adapting, by staying mobile, by building skills that matter in the new reality, by forming alliances with people who have complementary capabilities, by accepting that the world you prepared for no longer exists. I want you to understand something about time frames. This isn't a 1,000-year prediction. This isn't something your great-grandchildren might deal with. The AMOC has already weakened significantly. Some researchers believe we could cross the critical threshold within the next 20 years. Others think it could be faster, a collapse beginning within this decade. You might live to see this. Your children almost certainly will. The question isn't whether to prepare. The question is whether you're preparing for the right threat. Because right now, statistically speaking, you're probably getting ready for a civil war that may or may not happen while ignoring an oceanographic collapse that's already underway. You're stacking ammo for a firefight while the thermostat is being rewired by physics. Here's the final truth, the one that sits at the bottom of all of this like a cold stone in your gut. You can't stop it. Not you personally, not your community, not your nation. The AMOC collapse, if it happens, will happen because of forces set in motion decades ago. Greenhouse gases already in the atmosphere, ice already melting, fresh water already diluting the North Atlantic. The dominoes are falling in slow motion, and we're watching them fall. You can't negotiate with physics. You can't vote it away. You can't ignore it into non-existence. The planet is a machine, and the machine is making strange noises, and the machine doesn't care about your plans or your hopes or your political opinions. What you can do is adapt. You can learn. You can reorient your preparations toward the actual threat. You can shift your resources from fantasies to realities. You can develop the skills, acquire the knowledge, and build the systems that give you a chance, not a guarantee, but a chance of navigating the transition. The old world is ending. Maybe slowly, maybe quickly, but it's ending. The question is what you're going to do about it. Are you going to keep preparing for the loud disaster while the quiet one steals everything out from under you? Or are you going to open your eyes, look at the data, and start preparing for the world that's actually coming? The planet is a machine. The machine is breaking. And somewhere in the next few years, you're going to have to make a choice about what kind of survivor you want to be. The one who saw it coming and adapted, or the one who froze to death in a bunker full of ammunition, waiting for an enemy that never arrived. The clock is ticking. The current is slowing. And your old life, that comfortable, predictable existence built on invisible systems you never thought about, is running out of time. What are you going to do about it? In a world buried in ice, your standard pickup truck is useless. The roads are gone. The fuel is frozen. The infrastructure is a memory. If you want to know what actually moves when everything you counted on stops working, that's a different conversation. One we're going to have very soon, because the cold is coming, and it doesn't care if you're ready.